Hallo zusammen! Some of you might know that in Germany you become an adult by turning 18 years old. But why is that? And was that always the case? Let's find out. I guess for pretty much all Germans nowadays, it's hard to fathom being considered an adult at just 21. But in fact, up until December 21st in 1974, people in West Germany became adults at 21 years of age, a back then established situation which existed since almost 100 years at that point. From January 1st, 1975 onwards, 2.5 million young Germans instantly became adults at 18 years of age. It was former German Chancellor Willy Brandt from the SPD who started talking about that initiative about lowering that legal age in 1969. He said, diese jungen Menschen müssen aber verstehen, dass auch sie gegenüber Staat und Gesellschaft Verpflichtungen haben. Wir werden dem Hohen Hause ein Gesetz unterbreiten, wodurch das aktive Wahlalter von 21 auf 18, das passive von 25 auf 21 Jahre herabgesetzt wird. Wir werden auch die Volljährigkeitsgrenze überprüfen. So, in 1970, the German parties decided to lower the minimum voting age to 18 years in order to benefit from the younger voter potential as well. But up to 1974, some people and institutions still had doubts about lowering the legal age, the age of becoming an adult basically. The church feared a huge rise in early marriages, I suppose because they thought those early marriages might in turn have resulted in earlier divorces, more likely than marriages that were made in later life. So, on March 22nd in 1974, the Federal German Parliament, der Bundestag, voted in favor of lowering that date by 3 years basically, from 21 down to 18. But why? What potential, plausible, possible reasons could they have had for doing that? Well, I've addressed some before, but there were multiple reasons for adjusting this. Young German men already had to do military service at 18 by that point. At that time, up to 70 or 80% of all young Germans between 18 and 21 already had their own jobs, were allowed to drive on their own by the age of 18, had their own income, and they already had the right to take part in general elections or go voting in context of work councils. In short, many of them already had taken large responsibility for their own lives at that point and that age. And also because young Germans from the age of 18 to 21 already lived self-contained and largely independently, the federal parliament voted in favor of lowering the age for reaching die Volljährigkeit, the majority or legal age, from 21 down to 18, from 21 down to 18. There were almost no votes against this from either the government or the opposition. Both young and older citizens were awaiting this decision and were both in favor of it as well. I mean, when you are allowed to earn your own money with a full-time job and all, it should be possible for you to freely decide what to do with that money, right? However, some MPs rather opposed that change. They argued that the higher legal age of 21 also existed out of safety reasons, since not all young Germans would be mentally prepared or cognitively partially unexperienced for adult life, at, in quotes, just 18 years of age. Some aspects of adult life could be too complex or complicated, since technically 18-year-olds could buy or sell houses, deny an entire inheritance or heritage, get involved in complicated judicial court cases, etc., without really being prepared for all of that. Since back then, the older and the younger generations were sort of increasingly at odds with each other, pre- and post-1945 generations, youth protests throughout the 60s, and especially the West German student movement in 1968, generally different perspectives on life, and so on, some politicians didn't want that gap to grow even bigger by lowering that legal age. In addition, birth rates in the 1950s, meaning the post-war decade, had already drastically increased, and back in those years, almost adult young Germans were a large social demographic, which the politicians didn't want to have against them in the long run. What's really interesting, and I didn't know that before doing research for this video actually, is that in East Germany, former GDR, the DDR, Deutsche Demokratische Republik, you actually judicially became an adult by turning 18 from 1950 onwards. That's 24 years before West Germany actually, well, established that. It's really interesting, but also strange to think that there were two Germanys, East Germany and West Germany, and something really fundamental like that was so different. To this day, there's still an exception. The age of full criminal responsibility is still at 21. Between the age of 18 and 21, the court can choose between judging based on das Jugendstrafrecht, the criminal law relating to young offenders, or using das Erwachsenenstrafrecht, the criminal law related to adults, based on the person's maturity basically. This wasn't indisputable back in the early 70s and still isn't to this day. By mid or late 1975, pretty much all horror scenarios about lowering the legal age were evaluated through empirical studies, and they all came to the same conclusion. Bad scenarios hadn't come true, and to this day, the legal age in Germany has remained at 18, also after the German reunification in 1990. The curious Dave that I am, I want to know, did you know all that before? And what do you think about the legal age of becoming an adult at 18 years old in Germany? Is it a good age to become an adult, to take responsibility for your own actions? Feel free to tell us in the comments. And also make sure to check out the video description with many interesting links to my socials and support options such as PayPal or Patreon if you want to support my work on this channel, meaning videos about the German language and culture. Yeah. Hope you enjoyed this one, I certainly did. Thanks for watching everyone, I'm your Vlog Dave, tschüss und bis zum nächsten Mal.